Welcome to our second live show following the Masters of the Air series. Last night on, oh gosh, I'm not even going to say the date. Last night we saw the third episode. This is Melanie Davis. I am the founder of Triumph Press, and I published John W. Peace II's book titled A Boy from Cracker's Neck, which is all about his grandfather, who was a B-17 bomber pilot that flew more than 30 missions. So if you're just joining us, that's who we are. And we are here to discuss the series episode by episode. And John, what did you think about episode number 3?
Well, online, there's been some people that were disappointed in episode 1, episode 2, that it wasn't quite as intense as Band of Brothers. You didn't quite connect like Band of Brothers or even the Pacific. And let me tell you, the third episode took care of a lot of that. It was intense from you had the pilot's briefing, but then it got intense quick. So, a lot of the things I probably, was this maybe a little discouraged with episode 1 or 2. Episode 3 quickly turned that around.
And, anybody who watched our previous show, I was kind of critical. I didn't like how it started. I felt we needed a little more character development, but I feel like now that they're in the midst of the missions and we're seeing what it's really like up in the skies, all of that criticism is just irrelevant. And I feel like this is definitely the best episode so far. And I anticipate, even if it just maintains the level of quality that we saw in episode 3,
absolutely,
I think it's every bit the Band of Brothers in the sky that we hoped it would be.
And literally, for me personally, that was probably the quickest hour of TV I ever watched.
I agree. I was like, oh, it's over already. And yet you're just, it's so intense, and it's hard not to cry and to sit and think this is real history. And this is the things that they went through. Well, we actually have a very special guest that we're going to be bringing on the show to help our conversation. His name is Daniel Davis, and he just happens to be my oldest son. So I'll just take a minute and bring him on the stage and allow him to introduce himself as well.
Hello, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
So as introduction at the start, I am Melanie's oldest son, and with that came a lot of upbringing in military. Although I did not end up serving, I had, from the time I was 5 or 6, spent most weekends with Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, going to different houses, to different events, shooting competitions. You name it, I went with her to it. And when I got old enough, I was the chauffeur. I was the guy driving the car. I was the guy lugging the books and the ammo and the guns and whatever else we were bringing to whatever event we were going to.
There we go. Kind of thick, yeah. So I began my publishing career both as an author and a publisher, and so I collected stories of veterans for this book, and I've been working to help veterans with their PTSD through narrative therapy, just to kind of give a little idea. And I started a campaign called Love Your Veterans. And so Danny was right there with me through it all. And like you said, he's spent a lot of time with really great heroes of our country. And he also has just a knack for remembering things better than I do. So I think that we'll all enjoy his commentary as well. So let's just jump into it now. The episode starts out in a briefing room, and we're introduced to their one of their first missions. Not the first, of course, we saw a few in the first episodes, but this is a big mission. At the beginning, the person running the presentation talks about the growth they've had. I guess they had 12 bombers a year ago, and now they are up to 376 bombers and 240 fighters. And so that's how much growth, and they realize that coming together on this next mission. And John, if you want to explain just a little bit the mission that they're going to go on, and then just kind of let's just talk about how things went.
And y'all correct me if I get a little bit wrong here, but there was going to be 3 task force. And the 100th was going to be on the first one. They were going to end up bombing aircraft production facilities, if I'm not mistaken, fighter aircraft. And then the other 2 were going to hit the ball bearing plants. And different, they were going to travel so far. Yes. Yeah.
Resenberg was there to
I'll let y'all do the German names. I'm terrible. I'll let y'all do the names of the city. And the other two, Task Force 2 and 3, were going to hit the ball bearing plants and at different places and stuff. And one thing in reading the book, it's just a little bit sad to hear. Once you read the book, you find out that a lot of the missions to the ball bearing plants and even the aircraft production facilities were a little bit for naught. They didn't really do as much damage and as much towards the war effort as they had hoped. They thought going into the war that these were the primary targets that would end the war quicker. So, and one thing I had to make a quick comment, and I'll turn it over to Danny, was when they unveiled the map, my granddad would tell me that you knew how bad a mission it was when you saw the target. And of course, he would talk about how the night before, if it was going to be a real bad mission, they'd get extra food, they'd get real meat, and they'd actually get a dessert. And that's what they called at Bury St. Edmunds their last supper. And if they had that last supper, then they knew the next day it was going to be a bad day. So when they unveiled that map and all the men were kind of, a gasp, that's true from everything I've heard. So,
yeah. And I mean, I was just looking at, I have a tendency to go in and look at all the little behind the scenes notes on the shows and different episodes and all that. I was just looking and saw that their flight, that the 100th flight to Africa, was very much the extreme edge of the range on their flying fortresses. That was like, even on a good day without flak and without fighters and losing fuel, good weather, you're going to struggle to get all the way to North Africa from where they were flying and the number of hours they were flying. And then to add on top of that, the mission they had to do before even getting to Africa. It's just wild to consider as many planes got to North Africa as they did.
Well, one of the things, and can you imagine, they were like 5 hours to target. I mean, this was an all-day mission. So if you got wounded halfway, I mean, you were looking at almost a half a day before you would hit the ground for even medical attention. So you could just imagine how many men died just en route, just waiting on medical attention. So
and that's one thing.
That makes me think of when they had somebody injured in the plane, from the fighters going by, and he's injured and they still have to fly. And then some of them had to bail out. And I'm thinking, I literally said out loud, who's going to fix him when he's landed in enemy territory and he's shot?
Well, I mean, that's why I appreciated the show showing Kurt taking his plane to the ground. The whole reason he stays in the plane and tries to put it down in that field, and we end up seeing that doesn't work. But the whole reason he tries is his co-pilot is shot in the neck, and there's no way he's surviving parachuting out. So Kurt says, "All right, no, I'm sitting in here with you. We're going to try and put this on the ground," because it's sure, is he likely to die anyway? Yes, but if Kurt jumps out, there's no chance that he lives. And I appreciate how often, because the stories talk about this, the men that tried and how often they spent as much time. I mean, they showed it in episode 2 when the whole fighter group slows down for the one or two bombers that were damaged and flew at their pace. How much of this war was spent hampering and saying, all right, I'm not going to get to safety right away for me, because if I leave, someone else is for sure gone. And so we saw it first in episode 2 with them slowing down the bomber group, and now we're seeing it with these men and pilots saying, no, I'm not going to bail out of the ship. I'm going to try and put it down.
Well, and also that points out where they didn't have fighter escort. The only safety they had was in numbers. And pretty much if you got left behind, the fighters were just going to tear you apart. So
and
the only safety you had was try to be with the group.
And then that enters the big problem for this particular mission, which was that they were supposed to be part of a three task forces flying together, and bad weather delayed, and they ended up going anyway, even in bad weather, and they were alone. And so they didn't have the support that they would normally have had. And they took some heavy losses, maybe as a result, or maybe they would have anyway, because what was the life expectancy of a bomber crew?
Go ahead, Danny. Yeah.
I was going to say 5 to 8 missions was 25 was what they said was your tour. 5 to 8 was the average life expectancy.
Yeah.
So whether that took 5 weeks, 6 weeks, 8 weeks to do those 5 to 8 missions, whatever time frame, once you hit 5 or 6, it's probably where you're going to end.
And then where you brought that up about the death rates, you made a comment earlier. I'd like for you to expand a little bit on it about not doing as much character development and the reason why they probably didn't.
Yeah.
Yes, that's a good comment.
So-
This was off camera before we started, but it was really good. Yeah.
We're talking about how, this show comparative to Band of Brothers, one of the big critiques for episodes 1 and 2 was that, hey, we're not getting the same connection. We're not getting to learn their names. We didn't get to go through basic training with them like we did Band of Brothers. And the comment I made was that, it makes sense to me that they didn't, because especially as we've now seen here with episode 3, we lost of 21 planes in the 100 that took off. 11 of them landed in North Africa. So that's 100 men right there, gone instantly. And that's just one mission. And they've got to do this for how many more years? So of course they're not going to have us get a close connection to the pilots and the gunners, because every mission, most of them are gone.
Wow. My granddad personally told me when he first got to Bury St. Edmunds in the 94th Bomb Group, they were going to go on a mission the next day. And he can remember putting his stuff at the foot of his bed and starting to unpack. And one of the guys that had already been there said, you might as well wait till tomorrow. There's 50-50 chance they're going to be sending it back home on the next mission. So tremendous loss of life.
And think about the mental toll of that as we're talking of this. Hey, here's some good food, because we might see you, we might not when you come back. I mean, we haven't seen it in the episode yet, but they've given us clips of the next couple episodes, and one that keeps sticking out to me is that, well, you might be the last pretty face I see of the pilot grabbing stuff from the girl before they take off on their next mission. And it's like, all right, I can't wait to see that scene and more of this life, because I'm interested to see how they show the mental toll that, hey, every time you go up, it's more likely than not you're not coming back. Takes on these men.
And another thing, this episode probably showed first glimpse we got, and Melanie brought it up in our first live about the wait, waiting on the tarmac, on the tarmac to take off. Can you imagine what's going through these men's? They're trying to joke, they're trying to talk about stuff, but they know what they're going into. So, the nerves, it'd have to be nerve wracking.
And on this episode, I found it interesting. We got to see Bucky bending the rules again. Hey, we got reserve command pilot. What is that? And he kind of hesitates when he says it. And I looked up. That's because he made that phrase up right there on the spot. They didn't know what they were going to call it or what they were going to do it. They just knew that Bucky was going to be on a plane in the air and not staying back at command. But to consider that as well, you had guys that at the same moment that you had these guys that are trying to deal with, hey, we're about to go and we're probably not coming back. You had guys that are scratching and fighting to not be left on the ground. They're like, I'd rather be in the air with you than stuck here at base dealing with the aftermath.
Well, one thing I'm sure the miniseries is going to show throughout that's in the book. I wrote about it. Melanie's wrote about it in other books. The loyalty to your comrades.
Yeah.
I mean, they literally flew because their buddies were flying. It wasn't this ultra patriotism, or it wasn't the hatred to the enemy. You wanted to be in the battle to support your buddy and your friend. So, Great.
So then we see them take off, the nerves and the reassignments and the bending of the rules. They get up in the sky. And I think we got a really intense, last week was intense too, but we watched there's one moment where Buck is looking out across the skyline, and you just, it's almost like frozen in time, or, like things are slowed down, but you see the planes that are falling down and the pieces that are exploding, and you see the parachutes as there's people are jumping. And it's interesting too, because some of them had to decide, okay, it's time to bail. And then others like Beck decided, no, we're going to ride this out as far as we can. And you just kind of think, what decision would you make in that moment? But we saw a lot of the action where the crewmen are actually starting to bail out. And I kind of want to bring up something at this point. I'm going to pull up here. So there we go. So as mentioned at the very beginning, what brought me into all of this is an interest in our veteran stories and collecting them. And so I put together this book titled Heroes. And it's a collection of first-person stories from veterans from World War II up through our recent conflicts, all different ranks and wars. And in this book, I was actually able to share the journal from my own great uncle. His name is Wiley Hansen. There's a picture of him on the left is kind of the start. As a young man on the right is a picture of him in his bomber outfit. But that was actually taken when he became a prisoner of war. And so I was able to take his journal that he wrote not long after the war. It was 65 pages, and I had to shorten it to fit into this book. But at the very beginning of his chapter, I just want to take a minute and read to you the actual first person experience of a bomber crew, what was going through his mind and what was it like as he bailed out. I just think it's kind of neat that I have the ability to share that with you. So this is what he wrote. In a tough spot, it said that things flashed before your eyes, but nothing passed before mine. I was confused. I pulled off my oxygen mask, then put it back on again. I grabbed a small camera, took 3 pictures, but accidentally smashed it on an ammunition box at my side. Then, with the calmness of one who didn't know what the hell was going on, I snapped on my parachute, took off my oxygen mask, and started towards the escape hatch to bail out. And let me add, he was the bombardier of a B-17 bomber that was shot down over France. And so crawling back, I saw the co-pilot wave so long before sticking his head down through the opening. He immediately got caught on something and was kicked free by the navigator. He was the first to be killed. The flak from the German frontline defense was heavy, but not as severe as we had seen over several of Europe's largest cities. It seemed to be concentrated in just one area, right where we were traveling. A B-17 flying fortress in a formation ahead of us took a direct hit, reducing it to a giant black cloud of smoke. The loss of 9 men, 1 fortress fully equipped, a bomb load, and hundreds of gallons of gasoline and oil. It was our turn next. We were flying at the same altitude and speed as the formation ahead of us. In seconds, we arrived at the exact spot where they were taken out. All hell broke loose as the flak hit us. Our plane staggered in the air as a gaping hole opened in one engine. 3 feet of our left wing was destroyed. Smoke poured from the top of the engine nacelle, followed immediately by an enormous sheet of fire fed by oil and gasoline running across the red-hot fuel lines. Someone asked over the plane's interphone system, "How bad are you hit?" There was only a grunt in reply. The next few seconds of my life are the fastest I've ever known. I was at the side of the navigator, Homer, when he got his foot through the hatch. All at once, everything went topsy-turvy. He was thrown on his back, and I was slammed violently against the side of the plane. I lost sight of Homer an instant later. After an eye-closing blast of air, I found myself spinning round and round in midair. The plane broke in half, spiraled down for a distance, and then exploded. The concussion pushed me farther from the plane. I fooled around a long time, looking at my bloody hand and wiggling my legs to see if they were still there. With the realization that I was free falling, I said to myself, "You damn fool, you better pull that ripcord." I fumbled around and gave it a jerk. The chute rushed past my face and, with a slight lurch, billowed open. The harness began to squeak, and I grabbed the shroud lines, wrapping my arms in and around between them. I worried that the chute would detach, but it didn't. It was deathly quiet, floating in space. There is no sound in high air, no wind blowing through the trees, not even the sound of my own breath. There are no repeat echoes because there are no initial sounds. It's an eerie feeling. As my fears diminished, I saw several American P-47 fighter planes moving in circles just out of range, following us down and reporting our position. I was beginning to get happy because of the lack of oxygen. I waved at the fighter planes like a little kid, calling to them from the ground and asking for a ride. In the distance, our formation faded from sight. So
Wow.
it
What a
goes
story.
on from there.
Great
But I
story.
mean, that kind of is interesting because I think it gives a description of just what it's like up there when you're falling. And it's silent. You see the mess and the mass in this show, and you hear the noises, but those men that are parachuting, what they felt and experienced, that's just a taste of it. So
Great story.
Yeah.
It's just hard. It's another thing that kind of amazed me, and I remember hearing firsthand stories from my grandfather talking about how hard it was to bail out. I mean, these planes weren't exactly designed for easy access to bail out, and the struggle, and the battle they had to fight just to try to save themselves. Yeah.
Which I feel like this episode did a really good job of showing the struggles of getting out, the struggles of you see them getting tossed and thrown around all over the cabins and into the walls as they're trying to get through the doors and to the how they're jumping out through the bomb bay hatch and how that's like, hey, go there, that's the big open spot to get out. But
Yeah.
we get to see as well the scenes of struggle of, oh, hey, you're stuck here, let me try and go back and help, and then how he has to struggle to get from trying to help the ball turret gunner to
Oh,
then
what a
getting
terrible
out the
thing.
door, and how we see the struggles of the of Babyface stuck in the ball turret and how he has to make that decision. And then it's not like he makes the decision and immediately gets out the plane. He struggles and he gets tossed around and he finally gets the door open and he gets out, and it's just in the nick of time before the plane goes up in flames. And he's like, man, if you had hit one extra bit of turbulence and gotten knocked around one more time, you wouldn't have gotten out of that plane.
I thought of my great uncle Wiley in that very moment because I knew his story. And as I just read in his story, he jumped out and then, the plane was blown away. I mean, that's exactly what happened. And I think we should talk a minute. I know we were talking about this before the show, the accuracy of what they're depicting in this series, which I think is also really important to appreciate what's been put together for us to witness.
Well, and reading a lot of the reviews, there's been people that's maybe complained a little bit about character development and story, but the one thing that almost everyone has agreed on is the attention to detail in this miniseries is just tremendous. Everything, and I think Danny might talk a little bit more about the uniforms and stuff if you want to go ahead and make some of your observations you had.
So my apartment have all been watching together on this, and I went and did some research on my own because I had a bomber jacket as they call it, and then as I come to find out, the jacket that I had was not a true bomber jacket, and I went into a deep dive on learning the difference between the heavy bomber jackets where they were flying at high altitude with open gun turrets and windows and doors throughout the plane, so they had to be more bundled up, and then the fighter pilots that got a much lighter jacket because they, as a single person in a enclosed cockpit, they could give you a little heater and keep you warm, and so they didn't need this massive thick fur lined coat. They could take a much thinner leather jacket. And then how there was a very small amount of people that got issued their heavy winter wear ones that you see Bucky wear in the briefing scene. That I straight up paused that scene, and my roommates and I sat there and kind of went through and played almost a Where's Waldo of the jackets of seeing, okay, hey, this guy's wearing the winter one, and this guy's wearing the fighter jacket, and oh, he's wearing the older version versus the newer, because like some of the first editions of the bomber and fighter jackets weren't a zipper, they were a button style, and then later they went from the button to the zipper, and they changed how every time they had the two pockets at the front, but they changed how those pockets functioned. And so it was really cool to see, hey, not only are they showing all the different jackets like you would have actually seen in these in the 8th Air Corps, but we're getting scenes where we can pause and see all of them and really compare and contrast the different styles and how meticulous they're being with getting these jackets and these uniforms and all of this like the material they have, the gear they're given, they're taking the time to make sure that the show shows what they actually wore. It shows how they would have actually looked. It's not like we're taking some modern rendition. We're trying to be as true to life as they can.
Absolutely.
And Danny, you said that you did some research into even the dialogue, and one of the things Bucky said.
Oh yeah, I can share that. Yeah. So to set the scene, as we were talking about all the different planes exploding, we have that scene where we have all and bailing out, where Buck, his co-pilot, who the command structure of the plane is the pilot is number one. He makes the decisions. Co-pilot only gets to make those decisions if the pilot is incapacitated. But his co-pilot tries to jump over him and say, "We need to leave." And he starts ringing the bell and running through the abandoned ship procedure. And Buck leans over and grabs him. And I don't know how swear happy we're going to be on this, but I'm going to give the direct quote of it. He says, "Hey, you son of a bitch, we're going to sit here and take it." And that is not a line they came up with for the show that works. That is a direct quote from Masters of the Air of Buck's mission. Of he actually had to grab his co-pilot and tell him that and say, "No, we're not bailing out. We're not joining the 3 other guys from our squadron that have started abandoning ship. We're going to sit here and we're going to drop our bombs on the target.
We're going to take it." Dan, want to share this one quick story before we finish up and stuff. I shared with Melanie beforehand. This episode ends with kind of, are you going to try to escape or are you going to surrender? I have to tell this story. My papa told me was, and I have to give a little bit of background on this. I think they were on their 21st mission when General Doolittle increased the mission requirement from 25 to 30. So you could imagine him and his crew were not happy about that. And he would always say, once he raised it to 30, that if they ever had, his crew kind of were joking around, if they ever had to bail out, that they were going to surrender. The first 25 was for Uncle Sam, but the last 5 missions were for General Doolittle. And my granddad would laugh and said if he was going to bail out, his hands were going to be up in the air to surrender. He said no commando stuff for him. He'd done his job, and so yeah.
And it's wild to consider that. This is one other thing that I think we talked a little bit but I just want to really reiterate was the feeling of how accurate this show is, not only to the details of what they're wearing and how the flight happens, but my roommate and I commented on the second episode, and especially this episode, how much it feels real in their age. How young, because we stopped and we had to pause the show and talk with each other and be like, it's hard to watch because my roommates and I are all late 20s, early 30s. And so we feel old watching this show and we're like, man, these guys are younger than us. And then we stopped and thought of it, it's like, well, they were. These guys were 17 or 18, 19, 20 years old. If you were older than 2021, you were an old man on those planes.
My granddad was 23, 24 with a wife and baby at home, and he was considered the old man of the crew. Everybody else was younger than him on his crew.
And that's, I think, one, like, in reverse of how we started episodes 1 and 2 having, criticisms of this show comparative to Band of Brothers and how high a bar Band of Brothers has set for this whole genre. I think this is one way that Masters of the Air is going and doing more accurate and better than Band of Brothers did, is they are showing and casting actors that really look like who they're playing, not only physically, but the stage of life. That they really did get actors that are young enough to and look young enough to make it feel real. That these are teenagers. These are late teenagers going to war and having to make these decisions of, am I going to surrender? Am I going to play commando? Am I going to stay in formation and in this plane and take the punishment and the risk of getting hit by a flak, or am I going to bail out?
Wow.
Like,
Great show.
Yeah, it was. Well, thanks everyone for coming, and to the two of you for sharing and really taking the time to do the research to bring some details that sometimes you don't catch the first time watching the show, or just takes a little extra research. To those who are watching, or those who will be watching this after it's already been aired, we invite you to please come join us. We would love to have you share your comments, even if it's after the live recording. Put in the comments what you noticed or what you're appreciating about the show as we go along. And we also want to announce that when this series is over, we're going to continue these live shows on Saturdays with something that we hope you all will enjoy, and that will be called the Military Movie Club. So each week we'll pick a different movie that we watch together and come together and talk about it. So that's just something to look forward to in the future. Next week, we'll meet right back here at the same time and discuss the next episode of Masters of the Air.
Thank you much.